So mold is the big one that people are mostly concerned with. It's the most common, it's the most easily recognizable, okay? The biggest issue with mold is that it's caused by elevated humidity, okay? And warning signs that you might have mold before, or you're going to have a mold problem before you start seeing mold all over the place is like moisture condensing on the windows. Okay, if you've got water condensing on the inside of your windows, there's too much water in the air. Okay, an easy way to monitor the humidity level in your home is by getting a digital hygrometer. Okay, and I have one very similar to this. It's a combination thermometer hygrometer, and it gives you the temperature inside the house, and it gives you the relative humidity of the house as well. Okay, ideally, we're somewhere. Yeah, I would say in Humboldt County, we're around 40 to 60% relative humidity inside the house. Okay, you start getting above 60%, that's too much. I don't think there will ever be a time that we'll ever get below 40% humidity inside the house because it's just wet all the time around here. Okay, so there's not a whole lot we can do about that, but it's very simple when you have a mold problem, and everybody thinks this is a mystery. Okay, where's this mold coming from? Okay, it's because there's too much moisture in the air. Okay, the mold is everywhere. Okay, we're bringing in spores all the time. It's everywhere. It needs a certain temperature and a certain humidity level to start expressing itself. Okay, so we'll get to how to kind of mitigate that in a minute here. But usually it wants to be warm. Um, there are certain kinds of mold that can thrive in colder conditions, but generally it's warm, moist areas. Okay, and one of the biggest contributors to an area that's too moist, okay, too much moisture in the air, is improper ventilation. Okay, so here's a picture. This is kind of a classic, really lazy bathroom vent here. This is just kind of placed near, uh, and I don't even know what this is, some kind of vent, okay, but they make a special roof jack that you're supposed to connect your bathroom vents to, and it's got it projects into the attic space, and you can actually clamp this hose onto it. Okay, it's not supposed to just kind of like be in the general vicinity of a vent and expect it to work properly. Okay, this is going to lead to some moisture problems in the attic for sure. Okay, but the biggest thing with moisture problems in the house is there's usually no vent in the bathroom. Okay, and that's the biggest thing I see is we just didn't put a vent in there, or it's too loud so we don't use it, or it's broken, or maybe the vent's not connected to anything and it just goes into the ceiling or something like that. Okay, if you're not able to get the moisture out of the room, it's going to stain the house and it's just going to build up on itself. Okay, taking showers or baths or boiling water, those are all things that contribute to excess of moisture content in the home. Okay, we're generating steam, we're just pumping water vapor into the air. Okay, and it's at a certain point, the building materials aren't going to be able to absorb any more of that, and it's just going to be wet. Okay, and then mold's going to start growing on things. Everybody thinks that they have black mold as soon as they find mold in their house, and there's this big scare about black mold. The problem is there are a million different kinds of molds, and half of them are black. Okay, this one in particular, I'm going to give it a shot here, Stachybotrys. This is the one that's the infamous black mold. Okay, this is the one that can like cause severe health problems with people. I think it's killed some people. It's one of those things that if it presents itself, you're kind of supposed to like get out of the house because it does, like the spores that it produces can make people really sick. Okay, everybody always assumes they have this as soon as they find mold, It might not be this though, okay? Unless you've actually like tested it and they've determined that it is the Stachybotrys. You probably don't really have the black mold, but all kinds of molds are unhealthy for people at various levels. Okay, some people are more sensitive to molds. Some of them are worse than other ones. Okay, but again, this shouldn't be some big mystery as to why mold is presenting itself. Okay, there's either improper ventilation or something's leaking. Okay, maybe the walls leak or something like that. Maybe somebody came in and insulated an old house and didn't understand that putting in insulation without having a proper air barrier isn't going to work. Okay, because now we've just inhibited the ability of that house to dry. Okay, so there's a lot of factors, but there's only one cause at the root of it, and it's moisture, excessive moisture content. Okay, and it can be dealt with. All right, and this is really gross, but this is a pretty bad example of what can happen. And the biggest thing about the mold is that it can be around forever. Okay, the spores can lay dormant, and then as soon as the conditions are right again, elevated moisture levels, the appropriate temperature, mold will start growing again. Okay, so I get a lot of questions like, oh, how do I get rid of mold? Okay, can I just wash it with some bleach? Yeah, you can mix some water and bleach and wash the walls down and kill the mold that's there, but you've done nothing to address the conditions that cause that mold in the first place. Okay, so that's the biggest thing that everybody needs to understand is it's cleaning is one thing, but addressing the root cause of that elevated moisture is the real issue that you need to address. Okay, so here's a good little picture of health effects of mold. We all think of like allergic reactions and like from a respiratory point of view, but there's also a lot of dermatological conditions that can arise from contact with mold as well. Okay, and then depending on the severity of your exposure to it, how sensitive you are to it, what kind of mold you have, it can also cause like severe depression. It has psychological issues for sure. And then fatigue's a common side effect, headaches. It's something that people should definitely take seriously. And some people aren't affected by it, and some people are, okay? But it's a big problem, especially right now. There's a lot of schools lately that have been evacuated because they find that it's like moldy everywhere, okay? And again, this shouldn't be a mystery. It's a lot of these buildings that were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s that they didn't understand the importance of an air barrier. They understand how to put insulation in the walls, but they didn't understand air sealing and they didn't understand ventilation completely. And so now we're seeing a lot of mold problems appear, okay? So the first thing, like I said, if you have a mold problem, you have to deal with the moisture condition, okay? Maybe there's a leak. Maybe you have a problem with your bath vent. Maybe it's not hooked up properly. Okay, that's probably the single biggest cause of elevated moisture in a home is people not running the bath fan. Okay, at the very least, you need to open a window. Okay, but if it's 98% humidity outside, which it is a lot of the time around here, it doesn't do any good to open the window because that's even more humid than it is inside the house, okay? So you need to run the bath fan and exhaust all of that super, super wet air out of here, okay? Maybe you got a leaky window, okay, and there's water being deposited in the wall somewhere, and it's gonna appear as mold, okay? And just side note, I do have a list of common molds that you'll find inside the home in the Canvas page if you want to check that out. You need to have a properly functioning fan, okay? And this is something, everybody wants to cheap out on this because they feel like it's something that they just are forced into doing. You could spend $30 on a fan, okay, and it would work, but it would hurt your ears and it wouldn't work very well. If you spend $250 on a fan, and this is a Panasonic, it's called like the Whisper Quiet. Spend $250 on a fan, and it's going to be so quiet you barely know it's even operating, and it's going to move a lot of air and really exhaust a moist area. Okay. You want to avoid materials in your build that are vapor closed. Okay, we've talked a lot about this, but especially in our climate zone, we do not want vapor barriers. We don't want plastic anywhere. We want to be careful about like vinyl wallpaper and stuff like that that will block the transmission of vapor. Okay. We want to be careful about spray foam. Okay. Those are going to be materials that block vapor from diffusing through materials. Okay. And we don't want to do that around here. We want things to be able to dry out, dry to the inside or dry to the outside, depending on the conditions. Okay. We don't want to trap moisture in places. And then this isn't necessarily a vapor closed material, but it can be. Carpet, this is people pulling up some carpet. It's all moldy and gross underneath. There was a leak here. Carpet is one of those things that, it may not necessarily be a vapor closed material, but it can mask what's happening underneath the floor. Okay, you might not be aware that there's mold growing underneath it until you pull the carpet up and like, ay, what's happening here? Okay. In the bathrooms or in the laundry rooms or the kitchen, depending on what you're doing, you can use moisture resistant drywall if you have an area that's just going to be excessively humid, like the bathroom. Okay. We'll talk more about this, but mold is growing on surfaces generally that are wet. Okay. Not generally that are wet, but a lot of the molds are eating materials that are cellulose based. Okay, so wood based. Most drywall has a paper face on it, and that's just already, it's like it's already been chewed up for the mold. Okay, it's already been partially digested. It's really easy for mold to grow on that and destroy it. Okay, so excuse me, they make a drywall that has a fiberglass face on it. Okay, there's no paper on this product, and so there's nothing for the mold to consume. So you're really going to limit the amount of mold growth potentially in these areas that have high humidity. Okay, again, there's no exception though for proper ventilation. If it's really bad, okay, if you got something like this, yikes, you might just have to remove the material, remove all the drywall. This is beyond a 50-50 bleach water solution and scrubbing it down and turning the fan on. This is probably here forever, and it might just need to be completely mitigated. Okay, so don't let things get to this point. Okay, buy a $7 digital hygrometer and keep it in your house, and just keep an eye on the humidity level. Okay, and then one thing that I found out that was interesting. We had a habit of turning the heater off when we would go on vacation. And so it would be really cold in the house. When we came back, the humidity level was spiked. It was really, really humid inside the house because we weren't moving the air. We weren't drying out the air. And the moisture was just building up inside that house. It was becoming more like the outside. Okay, it was getting closer to that 90% humidity level that we usually have around here. So even if you're on vacation, it's a good idea to turn down that, at least turn the thermostat down, but to have the heat running a little bit. Okay, just moving the air, drying out the air somewhat. All of the forced air units that are going in houses remove moisture from the air. Okay, there's a condensation line that's standard on all those pieces of equipment that runs to the outside, and as the air is moving through it, it's pulling that moisture out and dumping it outside of the house, okay, removing the moisture from